In Utrecht vindt ieder jaar een van de belangrijkste festivals voor oude muziek ter wereld plaats. De wereldtop van musici, gespecialiseerd in muziek uit middeleeuwen, renaissance en barok, verzamelt zich in Utrecht. Daar brengen zij de muziek uit vervlogen tijden opnieuw tot leven. Festival Oude Muziek Utrecht staat in 2016 in het teken van la Serenissima, 1000 jaar muziek uit de Republiek Venetië. Professor Dr. Rosi Braidotti werd geboren in La Serenissima. Als filosofe en hoogleraar is zij verbonden aan de Universiteit van Utrecht.
During the late Renaissance and early 16th century, Venice was a formidable musical center, internationally recognized as a center of innovation and excellence, as we would say today. The Venetian school is probably best known for the painting of Bellini, Carpaccio and Tiziano, but it is equally important in music, the Venetian school that is at the center of the Oude Muziek Festival of 2016.
We are starting our musical trip in Venice from this incredible place. We are in front of San Giorgio degli Schiavoni. It's a place that was built at the half of the 15th century. They asked Vittore Carpaccio, one of the most important painters of that time, to paint 7 tales that are still inside. In one of them, the first of them, it's the vision of Sant'Agostino. It's a big room, there is a little white dog, and the most incredible thing is that the nearest things that are to you, that are looking at the picture, is music. There are 2 scores. We don't know who wrote this. There is no text, so it seems that this music is written for musical instrument. Think that this painting is dating 1502, and just few months before, Ottaviano Petrucci, not far from here, print the first book of music of the history.
Being a mighty colonial empire, a trading empire, means that you have mixity in your population. People come from everywhere. There's Jews and there's Arabs, there's Muslims, there are people from the East. It's a place of great multiculturalism.
Tegen de achtergrond van die culturele diversiteit was Venetië de eerste stad die Joden toeliet, weliswaar in hun eigen wijk. Het begrip ghetto was geboren.
So here we are, arriving in the ghetto. And the canal that separates the old part from the new part. And we can imagine the time when the Jews were confined to the ghetto. They actually were never allowed to live in Venice. They could come and do trade, but their time here was limited until 1507, I believe, when they were brought in because they could loan money and they were needed commercially. And at that time, they were all over the city. And then in 1516, they decided that having the synagogues and the Jews throughout the city was a problem. So they became shut in this small space.
Venetië heeft enorme invloed uitgeoefend op de westerse muziekgeschiedenis. Zo bracht het tal van grote componisten voort, onder wie Antonio Vivaldi.
Buongiorno, buongiorno, good morning.
Mickey White publiceerde een boek over het leven van Vivaldi. Wat we over zijn Venetiaanse leven weten, is voor het grootste deel aan haar te danken.
These gloves are dirty. This is the original birth certificate of Vivaldi, and it states that his father was a musician. It's got the name of his mother and his grandmother. But the important thing is that it says that as he was in danger of death, it was the midwife that baptized him. 2 months later, on the 6th of May, he was brought into the church for what we call the supplementary ceremony of baptism.
Vivaldi groeide op met muziek die klonk in Venetië. De geschiedenis van die muziek begint zo'n 1,5 eeuw voor zijn geboorte, met de uitvinding van de zogenoemde dubbelkorigheid.
In Le istituzioni armoniche by Giuseppe Zarlino in 1562. At page 268 is saying that in Venezia, in Venice, they are singing psalms in a quite special way, using cori spezzati. Spezzati in Italy means cut, as you cut the bread. One part here and one part there. And the important thing is that these two choirs are never singing together except for doxology, that is the end, so Gloria Patri and Sicut Erat, where the two choirs sings together. This is the big revolution, this is the new invention, this is the starting of the polychorality.
How is il gondoliere doing? Good. Venice is the city of my dreams. La Serenissima is a dream, really, when you think about it. In the course of time, popular taste obviously took over from aristocratic standards, and that's typical of La Serenissima, to mix a certain amount of calculated vulgarity with the impeccable taste of a very wealthy aristocracy, to put on shows, entertainments, fun, where talent and sheer joy are to be shared by the high and the low classes alike. The carnival is almost the emblem of this switch or combination from high to low culture. How very Venetian.
Mede dankzij deze ontwikkeling heeft Venetië het genre opera een totaal nieuw gezicht gegeven. Olivier Lexa is directeur van het Venetian Center for Baroque Music. Hij publiceerde een toonaangevend boek over de muziekgeschiedenis van de stad Venetië.
Ciao. As you can see, so Venice once again is like a big theater set. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why public opera was born in Venice. It was at the very beginning of the 17th century. And for the very first time, so Venetian people decided to open the doors to paying public. So for the very first time, they thought about earning money with a musical show. Like actually today on Broadway in New York, that's the same thing. Opera already existed in the past, but it was only made for princes and kings and queens. They had to make sure that the theater was full of people, so they had to think about box offices. And for that, they changed everything. They add comic plots to tragic plots. And now, accidents. That's the end.
Ciao, come stai?
Con bene.
Thank you. So, are you going to show me the ghetto a little bit?
Yes, we are just getting inside the Ghetto Nuovo, which was the old ghetto.
Okay.
The ghetto is a very interesting and confusing place because a lot of things are not what they seem. The ghetto was the ancient foundry. That's where the name ghetto comes from. So the new foundry was the first and the oldest Jewish settlement. That's why the Ghetto Nuovo, this large square, is where the Jews from Germany and Italy first came. We tend to think of the ghetto in contemporary terms, in modern terms. There have been so many ghettos in history, sadly, that we can help projecting 20th century notion, post-Holocaust notions on this place. Yes, the Jews had to be curfewed, the gates were closed at night, and yet it was, for the Jews, a kind of good compromise. They were safer here than in most other places in Europe. In many countries, they were not even allowed to set foot. So what we see is that what started as a temporary situation soon became a more stable situation. And I think that the most peculiar characteristic of the ghetto is that it quickly became a cosmopolitan Jewish society. with the Ashkenazi, the Italians, and later the Sephardim coming from Spain. So it's as if the different components of the Jewish people all gather here.
Thank you so much, Enrico. That was beautiful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, anyway, I wanted to know, tell us a little bit about what you just sang.
It was a kinna, that is a lamentation for Tisha B'Av, which is the darkest moment in the Jewish year, when we remember many terrible things happened from the destruction of the temple onwards. And we sing these kinnot, which are poems that are sung to melodies that are actually quite a mishmash of different things. Because since Italy has been the crossroads of many, many different cultures and peoples and different influences, what comes out is that the melodies is a kind of melange that has happened throughout the ages.
You really have to imagine the Campo del Ghetto as a kind of a real mishmash, to use a Hebrew word, where you would have heard Spanish spoken, Turkish, Arab. You would have heard German, Russian, Polish, Italian, but also Italian from different parts of Italy, so different dialects. I love to imagine the kind of music you might have heard, maybe a villancico coming out from one of these windows, maybe a makam, real Arab music from another, perhaps some German folk tunes from another, and even I like to think of the cooking smells that basically came from 3 different continents. It must have been quite a remarkable place.
Accorrevano portando enormi sacchi e sporte e uno, barcollando, chinava giù la fronte perché portava al collo un secchio e si inerpicava per il ponte, ma cadde e finì a mollo gridando «Oh mio Signore!» e dopo quello smacco con forze rinnovate di nuovo riempì un sacco di
one side of Vivaldi that people overlook is the fact that he was a teacher. He taught here. And in fact, he had a 38-year period here. This institution was for abandoned babies, which were brought here by their mother or by a passerby that found a child either lying in the road or even floating in the canal. It would be brought up. If she had a musical talent, she would learn music. If not, she would do sewing, weaving, skills like that. If you think of the life inside here, the women, all right, the women that he taught music for, the stories behind these walls, how Vivaldi and the women got on together, also within the 18th century, is all fascinating.
The 40 sonatas and 100 concertos that he wrote were performed and published, most of them, by the way, in Amsterdam, but somehow he fell out of fashion. So much so that after his death, his own work was published under the name of Baldassare Gualuppi, who was immensely popular at the time. Otherwise, the expectation was that he wouldn't have sold at all. Vivaldi was certainly not unsuccessful in his lifetime. Consider that none other than Johann Sebastian Bach actually arranged some of Vivaldi's concertos for his own harpsichord. Venice is also a lesson in how empires decline from the glory to the end. And it is a slow decline. Decline is not just one event, it's a process that goes on and on and on. And there are different moments in the glorious, in some way triumphant decline of Venice. Of course, when the Atlantic trade opens, the Adriatic eastern routes go into an economic slump. And then comes the Emperor Napoleon that puts an end to la Serenissima. But the end is not just a point, it goes on. And I think if you look at the last 200 years, what happens to Venice, it's a lesson for all declining empire. How do you reinvent yourself?
Ja, Venetië is natuurlijk een van de meest toeristische steden in de wereld. En dit is het hart, zeg maar, van het Venetiaanse toeristisch systeem. Het San Marcoplein, waar je een indruk krijgt van de enorme overvraag naar Venetië, die eigenlijk de Venetiaanse samenleving, de Venetiaanse economie, nou al jarenlang frustreert. Ik denk dat als er niet een adequaat en radicaal nieuw toeristisch beleid geïntroduceerd wordt, dat dan Venetië steeds verder afglijdt, zeg maar, naar een soort van Disneyland, een cultureel lege façade, maar dan zonder het Disneyland management, wat dan toch nog een aantal dingen in goede banen kan leiden.
Geweldig. The Four Seasons. Everybody knows the Four Seasons. And in fact, I think on the one hand, Vivaldi would have been very chuffed. On the other hand, he probably thought, I wish I'd never written it. The Four Seasons is one of the most famous pieces of classical music ever written. Unfortunately, it's become so common that we can't really hear it in the way that Vivaldi wrote it. This sort of rendition of the Four Seasons, in a way, kills it. This is for tourists. It's done in the Church of the Pietà, the new church, which Vivaldi never saw. It's become commercialized and cheapened.
Maskertjes van 2,50, bordjes die ergens in China, zeg maar, gemaakt zijn voor 3 voor een tientje. Het zijn echt ook wel de toeristen die dat soort goederen vragen, maar het heeft niks met de Venetiaanse tradities te maken.
I think we have to separate in the mind mass tourism and tourism in general. I live in Venice, so I meet tourists every day, and sometimes I want to kill them like every Venetian people, but I think there is hope, because I have the experience that we increased a part of the high-quality musical tourism in the city, focused on real Venetian music and real Venetian baroque.
So I believe, and we believe, that the ghetto could become really a focal point, a point where Jews from all over the world can meet, an ideal meeting point. If we no longer think just in terms of a community made of Venetians, born Jews, but of people who come here with some cultural and artistic or educational project, I think that the future of the ghetto is very promising.
Wat dan weer wel leuk is, dat een aantal dingen waar wij op de universiteit mee bezig zijn en ook collega's van mij aan werken, dat die wel steeds vaker een weerklank vinden in het beleid van andere steden. Met andere woorden, het is makkelijker voor mij om de stad Amsterdam of Barcelona of Berlijn te overtuigen van een aantal dingen dan de stad zelf. En aan het eind van het liedje doen we het toch eigenlijk niet voor niks.
Venetië. Een stad met een onwaarschijnlijk rijk cultureel verleden. Onder druk van massatoerisme in verval geraakt. De toekomst van deze stad is ongewis. Sinds de Renaissance heeft la Serenissima een voortrekkersrol vervuld in de westerse wereld. En ook in de huidige tijd weet het zich op de een of andere manier nog steeds die rol toe te eigenen.
How do you go from the end to new beginnings, and in a world that is changing so very fast? I think Venice's struggle with its own legacy, Venice's desperate attempts to reinvent itself are a lesson for all declining empire. Decline is a modus vivendi, it's a way of being. And maybe declining is a way of existing, a way of going on. And maybe after decline there is nothing more than a stillness of a city that has probably chosen to stay next to its story, to stay loyal to itself, even if that means no growth. And at some point, maybe no future, but no future is a way of being. And zero growth is a lesson maybe for all of us in the Western world. Maybe Venice is not behind us, it's something towards which we can all move now, a sense of an ending, but what a glorious way to go.